Good morning. It's a beautiful sunny day, blue sky, sunshine, and I'm stood here in the market square of the ancient German city of Bremen. That's in the north of Germany. And I've come here to give UK column viewers really a unique report into what's been happening around Dr. Reiner Fuellmich, the man who started the Corona Investigative Committee. Over recent weeks, his supporters have contacted the UK column to express their concerns about the trial that he received, the fact that he's now spent over 2 years in prison with about the same to serve. His supporters say that he didn't get a fair trial and that he's endured some pretty unpleasant conditions inside the prison. So UK column decided the only way to deal with this situation was to come to Germany to meet some of the supporters of Dr. Reiner Fuellmich and to hear what they have to say. But also I'm going to be able to go to Bremerforde. That's a much smaller town to the east of Bremen. And I'm going to be able to visit Dr. Reiner Fuellmich in prison to meet the man and to understand from him, in his own words, what has actually taken place. So stay with the UK column, initial report today, but on Monday's news coming, I'll be reporting about my visit to the prison in order to meet Dr. Reiner Fuellmich.
Hello, I am Reiner Fuellmich, and I have been admitted to the bar in Germany and in California for 26 years. I have been practicing law primarily as a trial lawyer against fraudulent corporations such as Deutsche Bank, formerly one of the world's largest and most respected banks, today one of the most toxic criminal organizations in the world. VW, one of the world's largest and most respected car manufacturers, today notorious for its giant diesel fraud. And Kühne and Nagel, the world's largest shipping company. We're suing them in a multi-million-dollar bribery case. I'm also one of 4 members of the German Corona Investigative Committee. Since July 10th, 2020, this committee has been listening to a large number of international scientists and experts' testimony to find answers to questions about the corona crisis, which more and more people worldwide are asking. All the above-mentioned cases of corruption and fraud committed by the German corporations pale in comparison in view of the extent of the damage that the corona crisis has caused and continues to cause. This corona crisis, according to all we know today, must be renamed a corona scandal, and those responsible for it must be criminally prosecuted and sued for civil damages. On a political level, everything must be done to make sure that no one will ever again be in a position of such power as to be able to defraud humanity or to attempt to manipulate us with their corrupt agendas. And for this reason, I will now explain to you how and where an international network of lawyers will argue this biggest tort case ever, the corona fraud scandal, which has meanwhile unfolded into probably the greatest crime against humanity ever committed. Crimes against humanity were first defined in connection with the Nuremberg trials, after World War II that is, when they dealt with the main war criminals of the Third Reich. Crimes against humanity are today regulated in Section 7 of the International Criminal Code. The 3 major questions to be answered in the context of a judicial approach to the corona scandal are: 1. Is there a corona pandemic, or is there only a PCR test pandemic? Specifically, does a positive PCR test result mean that the person tested is infected with COVID-19, or does it mean absolutely nothing in connection with the COVID-19 infection? 2. Do the so-called anti-corona measures, such as the lockdown, mandatory face masks, social distancing, and quarantine regulations, serve to protect the world's population from corona? Or do these measures serve only to make people panic so that they believe without asking any questions that their lives are in danger, so that in the end, the pharmaceutical and tech industries can generate huge profits from the sale of PCR tests, antigen and antibody tests and vaccines, as well as the harvesting of our genetic fingerprints. And 3, is it true that the German government was massively lobbied, more so than any other country, by the chief protagonists of this so-called corona pandemic, Mr. Drosten, virologist at Charité Hospital in Berlin, Mr. Wheeler, veterinarian and head of the German equivalent of the CDC, the RKI, and Mr. Tedros, head of the World Health Organization, or WHO, because of Germany is known as a particularly disciplined country and was therefore to become a role model for the rest of the world for its strict and, of course, successful adherence to the corona measures. Answers to these 3 questions are urgently needed because the allegedly new and highly dangerous coronavirus has not caused any excess mortality anywhere in the world, and certainly not here in Germany. But the anti-corona measures, whose only basis are the PCR test results, which are in turn all based on the German Drosten test, have, in the meantime, caused the loss of innumerable human lives and have destroyed the economic existence of countless companies and individuals worldwide. Corona Investigative Committee. Since July 10th, 2020, this committee has been listening to a large number of international scientists and experts' testimony to find answers to questions about the corona crisis, which more and more people worldwide are asking. All the above-mentioned cases of corruption and fraud committed by the German corporations pale in comparison in view of the extent of the damage that the corona crisis has caused and continues to cause. This corona crisis, according to all we know today, must be renamed a corona scandal, and those responsible for it must be criminally prosecuted and sued for civil damages. On a political level, everything must be done to make sure that no one will ever again be in a position of such power as to be able to defraud humanity or to attempt to manipulate us with their corrupt agendas. And for this reason, I will now explain to you how and where an international network of lawyers will argue this biggest tort case ever, the corona fraud scandal, which has meanwhile unfolded into probably the greatest crime against humanity ever committed. Crimes against humanity were first defined in connection with the Nuremberg trials, after World War II that is, when they dealt with the main war criminals of the Third Reich. Crimes against humanity are today regulated in Section 7 of the International Criminal Code. The 3 major questions to be answered in the context of a judicial approach to the corona scandal are: 1. Is there a corona pandemic, or is there only a PCR test pandemic? Specifically, does a positive PCR test result mean that the person tested is infected with COVID-19, or does it mean absolutely nothing in connection with the COVID-19 infection? 2. Do the so-called anti-corona measures, such as the lockdown, mandatory face masks, social distancing, and quarantine regulations serve to protect the world's population from corona? Or do these measures serve only to make people panic so that they believe without asking any questions that their lives are in danger, so that in the end, the pharmaceutical and tech industries can generate huge profits from the sale of PCR tests, antigen and antibody tests and vaccines, as well as the harvesting of our genetic fingerprints? And 3, is it true that the German government was massively lobbied, more so than any other country, by the chief protagonists of this so-called corona pandemic, Mr. Drosten, virologist at Charité Hospital in Berlin, Mr. Wheeler, veterinarian and head of the German equivalent of the CDC, the RKI, and Mr. Tedros, head of the World Health Organization, or WHO, because of Germany is known as a particularly disciplined country and was therefore to become a role model for the rest of the world for its strict and, of course, successful adherence to the corona measures. Answers to these three questions are urgently needed because the allegedly new and highly dangerous coronavirus has not caused any excess mortality anywhere in the world, and certainly not here in Germany. But the anti-corona measures, whose only basis are the PCR test results, which are in turn all based on the German Dresden test, have, in the meantime, caused the loss of innumerable human lives and have destroyed the economic existence of countless companies and individuals worldwide.
We've just been in to see Reiner. What was your impression of the visit, and how did you find Reiner?
Well, I found him quite fit, still very strong, still very, very, very strong, and optimistic as well. Yes.
He's very hopeful that an appeal that's being put together at the moment will be effective for him.
Yes, he's very hopeful, and I hope so. Yes.
And he's also mentioned the number of people who are actually trying to help him at the moment, and that includes not only members of the public but also people, legal professionals and other professionals within Germany.
Yes, right.
And that was a very interesting thing for him to disclose. So from what he's saying, it's clear that the support for him is growing within elements of how do we describe it, the German power base.
Yes, it gets bigger and every day.
Yeah.
Like the support from the people gets bigger and bigger, and many more people are waking up and see what's happening.
Right. So for people who've never experienced a prison, just tell us in very simple terms what happened. We arrived this morning and...
Yes, we arrived this morning. We had to show our passport. We have to close everything away. We were not allowed to take anything with us, only 10 euros altogether, so that we can buy a coffee or a piece of chocolate for Reiner and for ourselves. Then we had to wait in a waiting room, in the first waiting room. Then we were taken to another room for the security check, and then we were taken to the next waiting room, and we waited there until it was time to go upstairs and to meet Reiner in a kind of, let's say, cafeteria, but
it's quite a reasonable room because
yes.
It was big and there weren't many people
yes.
there, and of course we could have a coffee with Reiner, and he was able to have a chocolate bar, which I think he enjoyed too.
He enjoyed that.
Yes. And what was your impression of the prison staff, the warders today? How did you find them?
Very kind. I was hoping that this guy who we met was there, because he was very kind the last time I was here, and he took the time to explain, to answer some questions I had, and he took the time to explain many things to me, and I was hoping to see him again, and he was there. So, I couldn't be happier. That's good to know that there are people who are also kind to Reiner, of course, because that was not the case at the Rostov prison. There are good people who are still trying to help Reiner. So yes. This must also be said.
This is very true. And Reiner has said that not only are there people who are now kind to him, he's treated as a human being now, but he's also said that he's been able to help other prisoners. He's been able to do various work for prisoners to help them, and also that he's received help from other inmates in the prison. So this does indicate a positive change
yes.
in circumstance. Yes. So I'd like to end, Siba, by thanking you and Marie, who's sitting in the car now, but thank you for arranging this visit. It's been very important for me that I've been able to come to Germany. I've been able to come to the prison, and I've been able to meet Reiner in person. There's nothing that beats actually being with another individual to get a feel for how they are. And we've had a very interesting conversation today. But for me, it's been very, very helpful to get a better understanding not only of Reiner as the man, but also the work that he's been doing and the situation in which he now finds himself. But thank you to you for arranging that.
Oh, no problem. I thank you for coming here and to try to look into Reiner's case.
In fact, it started in 2021, beginning of 2021, when the parliament tried to pass a motion of indemnity to basically remove the responsibility of the vaccine manufacturer, just in case somebody die, they cannot be held accountable. And that motion was about to be presented in parliament. And then at that time, I contacted an MP, John Salong. And I said to him, okay, John, we need to meet now, okay, because this is very serious. This is for the sake of the population of Vanuatu, and you don't want everybody around us to die because of this vaccine. So I met him, and then he's an intelligent guy, and then he understood the serious matter that I was saying, and then. Later on, we met with another MP, which was Andrew Napuat. They were in the opposition part of the government. And then after that, what happened is we start to make a awareness video, to really encourage the population of Vanuatu to not get vaccinated. And then the fact that the manufacturer company wanted to be not responsible if anything happened, that was a red flag. So for me, it was already okay. You know what? It's like you are selling a product, but you say, oh, if you die, I'm not responsible. Okay, already. So then what is in the product? But we don't know. The ingredients were not disclosed. So anyway, we start to do that with Andrew Napuat and John Salon. We start to get a kind of a group, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the government wanted to find a way to arrest John Salong and Andrew Napuat. Me, I was in the background. They didn't know who I was. They still asked the police to find me because I was a source, because I was connected already with professors and experts in America. And that's how I get the data, basically. But it didn't happen. They didn't arrest me. And at that time, I remember that there was this guy, Reiner Fuellmich, and I searched and I found a guy finally who could get me in contact with him. And we get in contact, and I write the letter actually for the MPs, and I said to Reiner, I said, okay, listen, Vanuatu is a special place. And in that place, we are surrounded by the entities, evil entities like the UN, WHO, and you name it. They are embedded into the government, and we know each other. We are friends with each other. We know how they work. We know what they are doing. It's very easy because it's very close. So it's like a little village, And then also the fact that we could be international could protect these two MPs, from being to jail, and scare the government to say, okay, you know what, if you continue like this, we're going to file a constitutional case against the government of Vanuatu. Okay, so then Reiner answered, and he was very pleased to include these two MPs into the what was it, the testimony at the time. It was the Corona Investigative Committee, and they did a piece together, and I was there. I set it up, and it was fantastic. And then we broadcast that in the country as well, okay, to make sure people understand what was going on. And I believe that the work that we did, saved a lot of lives here in Vanuatu. We are probably one of the countries who have the less vaccination percentage. I think we are 70%, but you cannot trust WHO data anyway. And this is how we connected with Reiner. And then the time goes on, and then 2023, I learned that Reiner was arrested. And I'm an investigative journalist. I know this stuff. For me, it's a red flag. It's like follow the money, or it's like the timing of events. Somebody who is a lawyer, international lawyer, get arrested because he is putting together proof that the pandemic was a fraud, the PCR test was a fraud. So I said no. So I said no. I went to see John and Andrew, and I said, John, we need to do a piece, a piece for Reiner. And nobody asked me to do that. I was just here on my corner, and suddenly I was like thinking about Reiner. I said, you know what? We need to do something about it. Reiner helped us in a way because he was there for us. So I really felt like, okay, we need to be here for him now, because like you said, he took the bullet for us. After that, we did this piece. This piece went not viral, but pretty much in a lot of the freedom movement. And some people contacting me saying thank you, and some others. And then finally I met Sept. And Sept, I asked her some question, how, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to do a film, but I didn't know how. And I wanted to do a film, but I needed somebody to help me because it's a lot of work. So I kind of point out Sept. Sept, she was really, yeah. Let's get Reiner out. We need to fight and stuff. So okay, now I find the fighter. Okay, that's the woman I want to work with us. And I said to Sept, okay, are you willing to work with me on the film that I want to do for Reiner? Or at least a piece. We started with a piece with 41 VIPs. And she said, oh yeah, that would be great. I said, okay. And I said to her, I will teach you everything you need to know. If you don't know, don't worry. And we started to do that. Here we are today, 1 year later, a little bit more than 1 year. Now doing a film, to pull all the data out, even the data that is not known by the large public or the public, even from the freedom movement, there is some data that they don't know about. So we are putting all of that together in order to expose the case of Reiner. And I believe as a filmmaker, if you expose the truth, no matter what the danger, then suddenly the government is going to back off and say, okay, we have to be careful. We need to do another strategy or whatever. But basically what we want with this film is Reiner free. Why? It's because Reiner, I know, he's not done. He's going to fight again. And he is going to go all the way to put down not only the people who put him down in jail, but also the whole corona fraud, the whole pandemic fraud, and the whole elite oligarch, fraud, and all these people who think, they can do whatever they want, thinking that we are just a lab rat or something. So, the goal is to get Reiner out. It's not just to do a film. The film itself a purpose. It's a call for action. Reiner was starting to expose the big head, and they didn't like it. And they didn't like it for two reasons. One, because Reiner is a doctor of law, international. And the second thing is he was about to succeed to put this bastard in jail. By showing the way to other lawyers, by sharing the testimony, the witness testimonies and the expert testimonies, to any lawyer who wanted to fight their government for deploying, all the corona measures and all the lockdown and all the mandatory vaccination. These people should be in jail right now.
This is a short update on how the production of the film Free Reiner is going. We're in the process of writing the script in the form of a thriller to really unfold the story that will be interesting to watch. Script writing is a very important process because it frames the film in a way that not only makes sense, but also make it suspenseful. We already have a lot of data, and on the way to doing the film, I'm sure we'll get even more. But so far, we have all the proof that Reiner is innocent, and he has been framed by the people he tried to expose. So we will unfold these facts in plain light.
Well, hello. I'm here back in the market square in Bremen. When we sat down initially, the sun was shining and I thought we were in for a really nice lunchtime. But the clouds have come over. It's a little bit colder, but the market square is now full of people, and we'll make sure we show you some pictures of that in due course. But I'm really pleased to be here with Sept and Marie. And these ladies have come to Bremen in order to join me. Well, they facilitated me having a visit to see Reiner Fuellmich in prison. But Sept and Marie, you've come from a long way. Tell the audience where you've come from. Sept, perhaps you'd like to start.
Yes, we came from Switzerland, from the Italian part of Switzerland, Ticino, and we had like 12 hours drive yesterday. And it's not the first time that we travel for Reiner. We attended court last year in February, I guess, yes, when he started with his plaidoyer. And so we decided to visit him again. For Maria Pia, this is the first time visiting him, and I've been already a couple of times in the last few months.
Right, lovely. And Marie, you live fairly close to Sept, half an hour or?
Yes, half an hour or so. We didn't. We met thanks to Reiner, because we didn't knew before, and so I saw that Sept was speaking about doing interviews about Reiner Fuellmich, and so I decided to meet her. Because I said I have to know her, because she's fighting for Reiner, and I knew Reiner when he did his Corona committee, and I followed him all the time, and so I was astonished that he was arrested and he was in prison, and so he is looking for justice and truth. That's all what he wants.
Sept, you're obviously dedicated in what you're doing. Why do you feel so passionate about supporting Reiner?
Because I know he's a good man. I'm sure he's innocent, and I just felt I had to do something for him, because I was shocked about all the silence around Reiner when he was arrested and jailed, and I saw that just a few people were doing something for him, and that's where I decided that I could also give my contribution, and I started to fight, and I'm still fighting, and I won't stop until Reiner is free.
Right. And how did things begin for you? Did you start writing to him, and then you visited him? How did that happen?
Well, the first actions I took were to try to get the word out whenever I could. And then last year in summer, filmmaker Philippe Carrillo contacted me and said, Sept, we need to do something very quickly for Reiner. We didn't have time for a movie because we wanted to do something very, very quickly. And so what we decided to do was to get in touch with all the experts who Reiner had interviewed in the last, let's say, during the pandemic period. We got in touch with around 150 experts, and we asked them to record a 1-minute video in support of Reiner. And so we collected these videos, and it ended up with a 1-hour video. We had Archbishop Vigano speaking for Reiner. We had ex-MP Andrew Bridgen. We had Senator Malcolm Roberts from Australia. We had many other very important people, doctors, lawyers, activists, and yeah, that was the first important action I took with Philippe, and now we are going to the following step, and we have started with the production of the film on Reiner.
How many times have you been able to visit him in prison?
3 times in the last 4 or 5 months.
And how long do you get for a visit? How long is the visit?
Just 1 hour.
Right. That's a very short period of time when you're talking to somebody.
Yes.
And we think tomorrow that we'll get the same length of time when we're going to see him.
Exactly. 1 hour.
I visited people in prison before. I think that's usually been 2 hours, but I know the time goes very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always very difficult. You want to be talking in a social sense, but you also want to be asking questions, and the hands of the clock move very quickly. So we'll see how that goes. There are a huge number of people supporting Reiner at the moment. I've looked at the Facebook page, and I think that says that there are about 39,000 people worldwide who are still following what's happening to him and are still calling for him to be released. And what I found really interesting was that for his birthday, which was on the 5th of May, I think, that people were meeting all around the world, in America, in Italy, in Australia, in order to celebrate his birthday, but also to try and keep his memory alive. So it was obvious to me from looking at those clips that a lot of people are very, very passionate about this. And you said why you feel what you do. Why do you think so many other people are paying attention to what's happened to Reiner?
Because Reiner saved many lives. People write every day in social media that Reiner saved their lives. So they want to give Reiner something back, and that's why they are fighting all together to get Reiner released. And you're right. You could see that on his birthday, where we tried worldwide to hand over signatures from petitions that had been collected. Some embassies allowed to hand over the signatures, but most of them did not. We were in Bern in front of the German embassy, and we were not allowed even to get close to the embassy. So the police was there, and we were checked all the time. We were also not allowed to make some noise, which is unbelievable. We think to be living in a democratic country, but in fact it's not. So we were trying to hand over the signatures, but also we wanted to get the attention on Reiner's case, because we really need to get the attention of the public opinion, of media, of anyone who can help on his case, because it's just disgusting what happened to Reiner.
You don't have to forget him.
And Marie, what is your feeling about Reiner? Were you listening to Reiner when he was talking about COVID and the lockdown? Yes. Did you follow the CIC panel?
Yes, I followed him, and he interviewed so many people, and I felt that he was true, and I had so much confidence in this man. And suddenly, when I knew that he was arrested, I was really astonished, and I couldn't believe it, because I know he's a good person, and above all, I knew also many people who he has interviewed, and so for me it was really, as she said, I knew that it was a story. This docs are really story. This about Corona, but I needed. I didn't know anything, and I didn't. I needed somebody who was speaking aloud the truth, and so I think now we, as she said, as Seba said, we have to give him back. But it's for me not a duty, but it's for me. It comes from my heart, not because it's unjust that he is in prison and so long and for nothing, just because he wants justice.
Reiner's in prison, he's been through a trial, and there are people that say he's done something wrong and he deserves to be in prison. Tell us from your point of view why you think the whole of the Reiner case needs further investigation, why you think it's wrong.
Because we need to start with this kidnapping, which was really made up. He was taken from Mexico, and his kidnapping was disguised as a deportation when he was in Mexico. And once he was arrested at Frankfurt Airport, this kidnapping was disguised as an extradition, as an accompanied extradition. It means that something was wrong with that. So then he didn't have a fair trial, because you cannot say he had a fair trial when the defense witnesses are not allowed to take the stand, and where 90% of the motions presented by the defense lawyers are rejected without explanation. You cannot say this is a fair trial. The evidence was there, but the evidence was not allowed to enter this courtroom in Göttingen. Not at all.
Right. And you weren't able to attend all of the trial, but you did attend some days in the trial.
Yeah, we were lucky to be there when Reiner started with his closing statement, and we attended two days. Yes. It was towards the end of the trial. It was in February, and he was convicted at the end of April. So we were able to see him in action with his closing statement. Yes.
Right. Okay. And of course, he was accused in the trial of embezzlement, that he had deliberately attempted to take funds from the CIC and to use them for his own purposes. What is your response to people who say, well, he clearly did that?
This is a lie, because Reiner was only trying to protect the money from the state. Because at that time, all the people who were who were opposing the narrative they were having problems, and they were getting their bank accounts seized by the German authorities. And so Reiner had a phone call from somebody who had his bank account seized, and he warned Reiner and said, Reiner, be careful, because they are going to seize your bank account, so be careful. So Reiner had to decide very quickly what he had to do to protect the money. And what he did was to invest €1 million in gold. So he purchased some gold, which is today worth 2.5 million. So he made a lot of, revenue from this action in buying gold. And the other action was to take out personal loans Reiner took out 2 loans, and Viviane Fischer did the exact same. She also took out the loan, and these loan agreements were made in written signed contracts. And Viviane Fischer signed Reiner's loan agreement, and Reiner signed Viviane's loan agreement. So everything was there to see. It's in the books of the Corona Investigative Committee to see.
Right, and your point is that
Oh God.
see, but there are many people that some of them are on Substack, some of them are on social media, but they're saying, well, Reiner used money that was for the committee, the investigations committee, and therefore he's been punished for that, and he's been put in prison for embezzling money from CIC. What's your response to that?
That's not true at all. He just tried to protect the money from the German authorities, because that period, all the people who were trying to question the narrative, they found themselves in the situation that they had their bank account seized. And so someone called Reiner and said, Reiner, be careful, because your bank account could be seized very soon. So he had to take action, and very quickly. So he decided to protect that money, investing part of the money in buying gold, and also by taking out loans. He did that. He took out 2 loans. Viviane Fischer did also take out the loan, and these loans were made in written signed contracts, and Reiner signed Viviane Fischer loan agreement, and Viviane signed Reiner's loan agreement. So everything was there to be seen.
Right, and the other thing that I understand is that the money which Reiner is accused of stealing, effectively, that Reiner has never actually received that money. It never passed into his hands. Is that correct?
That's correct, because at that time, when he was in the United States for quite a long period, he had to ask someone to take care of class action he was working on, and also to take care of the sale of his house. Because what Reiner did, and he said that from the very beginning, I'm going to put this money, the loan money, I'm going to put it, to invest it in my property, which I'm going to sell very soon. So he was already on the brink of selling this property. He just, let's say, parked the money for a period of time. And so the person who was in charge to look after the class action and the sale of his house is actually the one who Reiner's money. And is also one of the 3 accusers.
Right. So this comes back not only to the circumstances around money and how it was handled in the CIC, but very much into how a court case was built against Reiner. And from what you've told me, I think that your feeling is that there was never any proper investigation and judicial process into what did or did not take place around Reiner, in your words, trying to protect that money.
You're right, nothing happened. The prosecutor never investigated. He didn't even check the criminal complaint, which was totally false. And he never investigated around the money that was stolen from Reiner. So, they just didn't want to see what happened.
Right, and am I also correct in saying that although Viviane Fischer signed with Reiner the loan agreement, and she actually received money that she was never brought before the court herself, i.e. she was never being accused of wrongdoing by the court, even though she'd undertaken the same process with the money as Reiner. Is that correct?
She was also investigated, but all the charges were dropped. So now we can ask the question why the charges were dropped
Right.
against Vivian.
Yeah. You've been very concerned about Reiner, and I know that you're very passionate about all of the work that he did to try and protect people during COVID and to warn them about what was really happening. As you know, I was one of the people that appeared as a witness for the CIC, and I in particular gave testimony about the British government's use of applied psychology in order to induce fear into the public to make them more compliant. This is the British government's own words I'm repeating here, but to make people more compliant with the COVID-19 lockdown in the UK. So I was very happy to participate in Reiner's CIC because to me it was very important that somebody was trying to gather together as many expert witnesses as possible. And I wouldn't classify myself as an expert witness, and what I learned was learned through experience, but many of the people who testified were qualified academics and scientists. So he, to my view, he did bring together an extraordinary number of qualified people who gave testimony warning that something was wrong about COVID-19. Is there anything that you think I've got wrong there, or you'd like to add to that? No,
you're right. He did a great job, and he was able to present all the evidence he had been gathering for these 2 years. In February 2022, if I remember correctly, in a model grand jury proceeding. So he presented all the evidence because he wanted to inform the public about what was going on, and he wanted to warn people of the danger of these so-called vaccines.
Yeah. So Maria, this would be a good place to ask you, because you said that you were watching and you were paying attention to Reiner's work. How did you feel when you started to listen to the evidence being brought to Reiner's CIC? What did you learn from that?
I just was happy because he confirmed what I felt, and he interviewed so many experts, really experts, and so for me it was all the time it was a confirmation, but I needed to hear this from somebody outside my family or whatever, because I didn't know people who was speaking about this, and so it was for me such a good thing to hear that somebody was doing this job, because it's really important to that the people knows what is really about, and is acting, and that he has consciousness of this event. Yes. Mm-hmm.
You said to me earlier this morning that lockdown had been very difficult for communities in Switzerland, but in your particular community you felt that it started to bring people together, and you talked about a feeling that people came closer between the community in Switzerland and some of the German community that you border with.
Yes, we didn't have so strong lockdown like other countries, but it was the occasion to meet us and to speak about this. And there was an association, Friends of Constitution. And so I met them, and we wanted to protect our fundamental rights. And because lockdown, it's against the fundamental rights. And so we met together, even with the German part, or the French part of Switzerland, and we fighted against the new law they did for COVID law. We didn't have much success, but even there was 40% of the Swiss people voted against this law.
Right. This is very interesting that you talk about people coming together. The lockdown period in the United Kingdom was very difficult, and a lot of people found that a very a difficult environment. When the UK column has put on social events or has been present at public events, at every event we've been to over the last 2 years, people approach us and tell us how bad the lockdown was and how difficult it was for them. And some of the people have said to us that they don't think they would be here, they would be alive, if they hadn't been listening to reports that we were making.
Yes, that was very important, yes.
Yeah. And of course, Reiner Fuellmich was one of the people who was standing up to give people a sense of what was real and what was not real, and also what was right and what was wrong. So, to me at least, in the beginning, he was doing a very, very important job.
Yes.
And that impacted on you, and it would appear that it's impacted through on a wider community of people.
Yes, of course. I'm so grateful. Not just for me, because I knew already many things, but for other people who didn't know and they were feared. So it was like calming down. It's not so. There is not a deadly virus or so. There is other things that are more scary than a virus.
Statement by the Defence Counsel for Dr. Reiner Fuellmich, 11th of June 2026. 4 proceedings are currently active. 1. The appeal on points of law before the Federal Court of Justice in Leipzig against the judgment of April 24, 2025. 2. A motion for judicial review of detention addressed to the Göttingen Regional Court is to be filed on June 12, 2026. This motion argues, in particular, for Dr. Fuellmich's release, given that he has already served nearly 2/3 of the sentence imposed upon him. 3. An application for an interim order filed on May 28, 2026 with the Hannover Regional Court, seeking Dr. Fuellmich's release from custody on the grounds of state-perpetuated injustice committed against him. The court rejected this application in a ruling issued the same day. An immediate appeal against this decision was initiated today. 4. A civil lawsuit against the state of Lower Saxony, which was also filed on May 28, 2026. In this case, too, the client seeks release and a declaration that the state of Lower Saxony is liable to pay him damages. It should also be noted that our client may face further proceedings regarding the same matter of Corona Investigation Committee. The judgment of the Federal Court of Justice is therefore crucial. We have no influence over the speed of the court proceedings and must consequently wait. We hope for a decision in July 2026. Last week, the Higher Regional Court of Braunschweig ruled in favour of a telecommunications complaint filed by attorney Katja Verma. This gives the defence team a positive outlook. The primary legal arguments in the aforementioned proceedings centre firstly on the Göttingen Criminal Court's incorrect assessment of the corporate background of the Corona Committee, and secondly, and most significantly, on the fact that Dr. Fuellmich is an individual being persecuted by German authorities for his political work. There is now clear evidence that the so-called deportation was, in reality, an abduction orchestrated by the German state through indirect perpetration. We will not accept this, which is why we are very pleased to have the support of the US authorities now. It is safe to assume that the political pressure from the USA is highly uncomfortable and above all embarrassing for the German state, given Germany's notoriously bitter and shameful history regarding political persecution. The prohibition of political persecution enshrined in the German Basic Law logically entails that the political persecution of German citizens by German authorities while abroad is equally unlawful. The defence anticipates that our client will very soon be vindicated and will then return to his core legal practice, the law of damages, a prospect that may well prove uncomfortable for certain individuals and institutions, yet will restore the values of truth and justice to their rightful prominence. And that is a good thing.
Good morning. I'm here with my guest, Michael Reichel, and the subject is going to be Reiner Fuellmich. And we're going to be discussing not only the events around his trial and incarceration in prison, currently in Bremerforder in Germany, but we're also going to be discussing some of the reporting that's gone on around Reiner. And not only his imprisonment, but of course what he did in setting up the Corona Investigative Committee. So, Michael, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Can I ask if you start off by just telling the audience a little bit about yourself? You've been in business, you're retired, I think, at the moment, but just give us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, let me begin by saying that I don't really like the word retiring because I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and it's with me all the time. So yes, I've slowed down doing the entrepreneurial work, but I also felt that it was time to sort of offer my services to the good of mankind, and having been part of this Corona matter right from the start. I felt that, well, Reiner is in trouble. We need to do our duty. So that's basically it. I'm an engineer in the background. So most of my entrepreneurial work has been in science.
Right. And I think this is important because you come completely from a business and professional background. And yet what you've just expressed is the fact that you feel from a human perspective, you feel the need to not only be doing more than that, but specifically you felt the need to engage in order to try and help Reiner in the situation in which he now is. So I think this is a very important starting point. And I'll just come back to you by saying that having recently been able to go to Germany and visit Reiner, I was struck in talking to Siba and another lady with her called Maria, with the passion they have for seeing the truth coming out and also trying to help Reiner in his situation. So it's clear that Reiner has elicited or created a lot of emotional support in many people, and I think this is very interesting.
Yes, I agree. To me, it's just something. It's not just a sense of duty. I think it's a calling because if you put what happened to Reiner in a European or even global perspective, if we don't stand up now, it might be too late in the near future. So it really boils down to something that some of us have to do. Now, not everyone feels the same, and it brings us to more social behavior kind of issues. But the ones of us who have seen the truth, we must act on it. I don't think there is any other option.
Yes. Yeah, no, no, it's a very important point. And also, I'll smile and say that I am here now. Um, will reveal the secrets. I'm going to be 72 this year, and I'm still effectively working full time, but it's because I enjoy what I do and I get satisfaction out of it. But yes, also I feel this need to be doing what I'm doing because we're living in very important and dangerous times. So I think it's beholden on as many people as possible to be doing their best for their fellow man as opposed to just becoming or getting enjoyment from the golf course and
Mm.
spending money. Yeah.
Yeah, you really raise an important issue because I think that having thought through this many, many times, people younger than, let's say, 50 years or 50 plus don't have the same scope of reference that you and I have, and indeed Reiner, of how society has changed during our lifetime. At least we had the illusion of democracy and the rule of law and so on. And this is all we're asking for is for it to be upheld. So, and we can see this has been in serious decline, and I don't want to leave this world not having done what I can.
Yeah. It's an important point. And of course, when children come along and
Yeah.
grandchildren, you feel this even
Yes.
more strongly that you certainly don't want people to be pointing a finger at you and saying, why didn't you do something? So
Yes.
I completely understand this.
But
Um,
there is this fact of, the 50 plus age not having the same awareness of what's going on. And it increases our duty to do something about it because we are aware of it.
yes, absolutely. And the change has been enormous. During my trip to Germany, I was having some conversations about the the changes that have happened in the United Kingdom and England.
Mm,
And for me, the last 20, 25 years, the change is extraordinary. And probably one of the best reflections on this is occasionally I've been contacted by expats. So um, they may be English or Welsh or Scots, but they've been living abroad for many years, and then they've come back to England, and they are just astonished at how society looks and how it behaves. One
yeah.
man in particular had spent a lot of time in India, and he said he just could not believe the change in UK. So yeah, we've lived through some really significant events. Okay, well let's get into um, Reiner Fuellmich. How did you get interested in his case, and how did you start to get involved in helping him in current times?
Well, as for many of us, I think he was a beacon of hope when this pandemic disasters began rolling out. Now, I was already triggered. I was cocked and ready to fire off basically because as a scientist, I had seen the nonsense about the climate. And then when this pandemic happened, Reiner and his work became like a beacon of hope. So me and my wife, we were watching what Reiner did with all the people he interviewed, and that was very, very important. I can also understand why people saw his work as this beacon of hope and were the only thing they could do because their own societies had failed to support them. They actually sent him the money so he could start doing something productive. And I think we'll return to that fact later on in the talks that we're going to have here.
Yes, that alone is a very important point because people don't give up money easily if you're
No.
trying to do something in a positive sense in challenging the state or challenging the system. So when people start to contribute in large numbers, that immediately makes a statement that what you are doing is clearly important to them and they place value in it and they want to help.
Yeah.
So that's significant, I think, for me.
Yeah, and then the final straw, I would say, was when he was suddenly locked up, taken, and then locked up, and I began following this legal procedure, although it's in German, and the information that came out during the court proceedings was kind of um, it was sparse. So I started actually sending him quite long letters, telling him what I thought and what was going on around the world and the nonsense and so on and so on. And I had sent about 17 or 18 very long letters, 3 to 9 pages. And I also know today that many others sent him letters. He has no, I don't think has had any problem with his free time, so to say, in jail. But then I started wondering what is actually going on here, because there is a complexity in this legal procedure that I didn't understand. And it's also in legal German. So I did an in-depth study, as I would, any other project I get into in my line of work. You need to have background and facts. It's a bit of a scientific process, basically. And I also employ the use of AI, as I had very good experience with using that in the past. And I sent Reiner this report or analysis, more as a entertainment than anything else, I thought. But he came back to me very quickly and said, "Mike, this is the best I've seen. Can you join the team?" And this was back in November 25 last year. And yes, now I'm fully in, fully on.
Michael, this is really interesting point here that you send him an analysis of, if I've got this right, you send him an analysis of what has happened around him. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. And he reads it and that it immediately resonates with him. It makes sense to him.
Yes.
This is very, very interesting for me because now having had the opportunity to sit with Reiner in prison and talk to him, I have to say to the audience, very short time, an hour. But the time you get there, pleasantries, and Reiner, of course, is very, very keen to just talk and be normal. So
Yeah, it needs to.
that he needs that because that's a safety valve for him. But those pleasantries, that takes up time, and then you're left with probably about 3/4 of an hour, maybe 40 minutes to try and talk some serious things. And I could tell immediately that he was a man under pressure, and it was
Yes.
very noticeable that he was one man when we arrived and he was a different man when we left. And what I mean by that is clearly and understandably the visit. So I was there, but also two ladies who've been supporting him for quite some time were there. And the visit and the social interaction, intellectual discussion meant Reiner clearly felt better when we got to the end of the visit, and that was very clear for me to see. But also in asking him some questions, there were various things where clearly it was difficult for Reiner to describe what had happened when he was talking to me about, I'll say, how there had been a breakdown in his internal team. He was finding it difficult to describe exactly what had happened. And that, in my opinion, was not him being guarded in saying what did happen. That was simply that he was finding it difficult to describe. And I'll add to that, this wasn't to do with his English, because his English is exceptionally good. He was simply finding it difficult to rationalize and explain what had taken place. And so if you produced an analysis, Michael, that he responded to, you'd got a very clear and interesting insight into what had taken place, I would suggest.
Well, yes, and it's not that I had any doubts, but I really had to understand in more depth of the proceedings and what was going on, because there's information out there that can be confusing and actually misleading. And we should not also forget that there's definitely some sort of defamation going on. So I really had the urge to understand what was going on. And since then, I've been doing quite a lot of additional research. One, for instance, is how this one of his former colleagues actually managed to lay his hands on the money, the proceedings from his house sale, which was significant in actually convicting in the conviction. So we may return to that if you ask me that question later on.
Perhaps this is a good place to start, if I may, because clearly a lot of people who are interested in the Reiner Fuellmich case immediately home in on the money. He's in prison for embezzlement of all that wonderful money that was given to help support the CIC work. That is a focus of a lot of people. And that then colours everything else that follows. So could we be upfront here and start off with talking about the money aspect and what did and did not happen to the money, and what you've discovered about this, because you've done all the research.
Well, money is always present in one shape or form in whatever we do in life, and my experience in life is that money can really corrupt. And with that life lesson, I sort of went into this looking at it with a critical eye. And I'm really trying to understand what's also written between the lines and all these facts and circumstantial evidence that pops up. And we can discuss money for quite a long time too. I think that if you begin at the beginning where CIC was founded, it's indisputable that Reiner was the moral magnet for the funds that came in. He was then in cahoots or working with Vivian Fisher, but Reiner was the one that was the public figure, and his aura, if you want to say that, because as you pointed out, he's very believable. He comes out as a warm and trustworthy person, and I think that came through in the media. So at that point in time, people started sending him money. And with his history in banking, because he went into predatory real estate financing in previous years, he was a persona non grata in the banking industry, and this is going to come down and haunt him later on as we talk. He had issues with putting money in some account somewhere. So they tried to do their best and eventually succeeded. But there was a lot of money coming in, a lot of money. We're talking about many hundreds of thousands of euro in the early days. All in all, we're talking about 3.5 to maybe 4 million euro that came into this in terms of donations.
This is a very good starting point, and I will add to it that when I was able to talk to Reiner, and we did just touch on some aspects of the money, but clearly he was surprised at the reaction from people. This was not something he set out for a campaign to raise money. He didn't have to, because the money flowed in.
Yes.
And in very large quantities.
Yes, I think it is interesting to know that very fact is very interesting to dwell on for a moment, because what Reiner, in a sense, did was assume the role that our societies should have as a protection or as an institute for making sure that democracy and human rights are followed. So he more or less involuntarily took on that. At least people, what can we do? So the only thing people could do, because they had no law and democracy rights to fall back on, they actually sent him his money. I think this is one of the reasons what happened. And this is why he was so successful in doing that. And it was all started as a foundation. So there was no irrationality or any embezzlement going on at any point in this early stage. It was just money is coming in. What are we going to do with it? And at the same time, he was so busy. He was, working abroad in the U.S. for this tour. He started the class action with thousands of companies, and also money came in there as well. So he was very, very busy. And his law firm, which he had now around 7 employees in, was fully involved in supporting all the practical matters, administration and so on, that was going on, rapidly rising. On top of this, you had all the arrangement for the podcast that we're doing, technical, making it all work in a practical sense, and so on and so on. So it was very, very busy.
A lot of money comes in to an organization which is already very busy in running the interviews, and those interviews with the experts that the professionals and the experts that spoke out on the COVID-19 pandemic, as many people would call it, and the subsequent lockdown. That got into the hundreds of expert witnesses coming forward.
Yes.
I was also invited to give testimony, which I did on the subject of applied behavioral psychology, which I think the UK column had broken a story to do with the use of applied psychology by the British government to make people in this country more fearful at that time, in order that they were more compliant with government policy. And we rapidly saw that these techniques were actually being used in other companies. So I was invited to give testimony, and I was very glad to do so. And at the time, I was very impressed to see the quality of the people that Reiner and his team had assembled. But of course, they were doing that. They were assembling the expert witnesses. They were taking testimony. They were getting that record. At the same time, they were also in the process of organizing themselves and trying to stabilize themselves as this thing got bigger. So I think people tend to look in on CIC and what Reiner and Vivian Fisher were doing, and think that it was a sort of professional organization that was established, and it had people working for it, and it was all organized. But it was none of those things. This is my impression.
Yes.
It was none of those things.
No.
It was a group of people trying to do their best.
Yes.
And what they had started to do responded with the public. And therefore, there was this surge in support and also financial support. And that money was also a problem, because it's one thing to have donations of maybe 10, 20, 50,000 euros coming in. That's one level of finance. But if you're in the position where you've got hundreds of thousands into the million plus, this is something that raises all sorts of problems. How do you handle this money? Where do you bank it? How do you protect it? And all of that was happening alongside the interviewing of witnesses.
Correct. Yes, and coming back to the subject of how money can corrupt, for some reason, Reiner Vivian felt that they needed to have more directors in the company. In fact, the company was a very special type of early stage formation of a company, and we can go into that later on. But in the pursuit of finding new directors, one of Reiner's former colleagues or associates in the business, a professor at law, Martin Schwab, he had a few students that he that recently had turned into lawyers that he recommended. And consequently, Antonia Fischer and Justice Hoffman came on board. And we can see that in the videos that suddenly there were a couple of somewhat younger persons there. They were very passive, and it turned out they were completely passive. But it also turns out that they were, I would say, some kind of mole in the system. They're the ones who turned against him and filed a initially civil complaint of embezzlement. And that's when things started turning sideways.
Michael, there's correct me if I've got this wrong, but I believe that the first stage with Reiner and Vivian Fischer getting some more help on the committee itself, I think it was Vivian wanted to get some scientists actually involved with the CIC itself, and both she and Reiner made, well, I think it was mainly on Vivian Fischer's side, she made efforts to bring in scientists, but they could not get people of the right caliber, and they could not get people to commit to the work. And then when that had failed, that is the point at which they then said, well, there are some legal people we could bring in.
Yes.
Have I got that correct?
Yes, and in fact, to juice this up a little bit, Reiner asked two highly skilled and reputed lawyers to come in, professors, I believe, in law. They came in, took a look, turned around and went out again because they weren't comfortable with Vivian Fischer. That is what Reiner has told me as well. So, and again, all of this should be seen in the context of everything being very, very busy, very occupied, very urgent.
And there's also the business expression of recent years has been on-the-job training, that Reiner was doing what he was doing.
Yes.
And he was clearly doing some really excellent work in bringing these experts together to testify. But the environment in which he found himself was one which was completely unique. So he would have been absolutely learning and trying to feel his way in the whole organization, what they were doing, and also how people reacted to him and what he was doing. And I think this is a really important point for the audience watching, listening into this, is that I can say after working for 20 years, the 20th year this year, with the UK column, setting up a media organization to try and counter the sheer propaganda and misinformation of the mainstream media. We have learned so many times over the years that nothing is quite what it seems. You will get people who want to come and work. They volunteer to come and work with you. You can explain that it's hard work. You can explain that it brings challenges because people can treat you very badly. They can expect you to work 26 hours a day for no pay in order to provide them with the news and information they think they deserve. So people can be really demanding and sometimes very unpleasant. And I've seen people completely change when they come into the real environment of what we've been doing in a media organization. So I do not find it very difficult to understand that when Reiner set up this CIC, and he knew in doing that he was making a substantial challenge, not only to the German government in relation to COVID-19 policy, but actually to a globalist policy around how COVID-19 was to be handled, the lockdown. He was absolutely putting himself at risk and putting his head, to use an English expression, above the parapet.
Yeah, for sure. And what you're saying is I think anyone who has started their own business or as me being a pathological business starter will immediately understand the challenges you have, and not underestimating what we touched upon previously is that all these hygiene factors that you have to have for a business to work, they're the grease for the machinery to run. And if you don't have that, it's going to get much harder further down the line. So I think we can all picture what kind of challenges he had from the start, and how easy it is to actually not be able to solve them as quickly as he should. There's a human factor here, and I think we really need to walk in his shoes to assess what was going on. And this is important because what we might be talking on later on here, to have this context, to have an understanding how the stage was set.
Yes. Can we just do a little bit more on the lawyers that came in? It was 3 in total.
No, only 2.
Only 2.
But it turns out that they were actually a group of 3, but only 2 directors came in, Antonia Fischer and Justus Hoffmann. The third one, Marcel Templin, he came in later on when Reiner he started his class action project. And that was a completely separate thing, isolated from CIC or Kronauschutz. In order to have someone to manage the escrow account, he put in this lawyer, Marcel Templin. So he was friends with the other 2. So of course he was fully involved in an informal sense. But formally, he was asked by Reiner to simply work as a manager for an escrow account.
And just explain that escrow account. What was that account for?
It was for the funds. Actually, it's the retainers is the correct word, that these 1,000 members of the class action was wiring over to the special escrow account. Lawyers have escrow accounts which are specifically protected in case the lawyer goes bankrupt. So it's money that can't be touched.
Right. Reiner has followed the correct procedure, which we would expect him to as a lawyer himself. And then he places another lawyer in charge of those funds.
Yes. And this is a completely separate project from what was going on at CIC.
Okay. So if I can just jump back, you've mentioned the escrow account for the class action. Where did Reiner put all of the donations that came in to support the work of the committee?
Early on in various accounts, because he had problem establishing accounts. He shouldn't have, but it seemed like there was. So for a while, his accountant actually had an account where they put money in. And I can't completely reply to you how funds were moved here and there. And at some point in time, I'm sure they also had a proper account. But at the early onset, there was an issue with this. It's simply too much money coming in. And there's also the threat that when you get money like this, banks were very observant to money laundering. So money coming in like this raised the eyes of some banks that and authorities that, a warning flag that what's going on here. So there was a complication there, but I'm not sure how much this actually influenced the later legal proceedings.
And of course, one of the problems with this is spending the time to understand more requires a lot of time, spending a lot of time with Reiner. None of us are able to do that. So therefore, the picture as to what happened around the money in the accounts at the moment is the picture that emerged through the trial proceedings.
Yes.
And this is a point which you and many others are questioning, but I'll come to those in just a bit.
Yeah, good.
With regard to the banks, I'd like to add into that again, if the audience are listening into this and thinking, well, if there's something difficult with the accounts, this must have been Reiner's fault. But actually, over the last 10 years in particular, banks throughout the West have become increasingly more onerous in supposedly stopping international money laundering and therefore greater checks and balances. But this has grown to the point where I know of many businesses that have had major problems trying to run normal business accounts with the normal high street banks here in the UK, because the level of questioning and checks on an ordinary member of the ordinary person living in the United Kingdom were impossible for people to, pass the test. And so bank accounts were delayed if you were trying to set them up, or
Yes.
they were set up and then when money was passed into the accounts, there were problems. This is a common theme from businesses
Yes.
in UK,
Yeah.
and I believe that exactly the same problems have existed in Germany with regard to banking.
Well, all European banks, I think, as far as I know, and I know it does exist in other countries from my own Sweden, and I know it existed and still exists, of course, in Germany, is what they call a misnomer, KYC, which is short for Know Your Customer. And it is in fact the opposite, because if they knew the customers, they would not need to enforce the things they're doing. I think there's a plan behind this, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can say, operating as a director of a company, which I do, in order to do that, my full passport details are now recorded by the government, and
Hmm.
I've no doubt the banks as well. So it's gone over 20 years from a business. Somebody running a business would know their bank by the fact that they would meet the local manager of the bank to
Yes,
discuss
exactly. Mm.
taking loans or what money was required for or where money was going to come. That would be a personal one-to-one meeting with your
Yes.
local bank manager. All of that has now gone, and you simply talk increasingly via digital communications with an unknown person in the bank who makes assumptions about what people are doing, and this leads to problems. So this is a very difficult banking environment, and Reiner had a lot of money coming in that
Yes.
was largely, well, overwhelmingly money which the government would perceive was being used to challenge it and its policies.
Yes. Exactly. I think we have parallel experiences here. As a business person, I've seen all these things as well. In fact, my banking relationship was with 40 years in the same bank, and still they're asking questions which are highly personal and suggestive, not very morally proper. And banks used to be very proper at some point in time, but that seems to be gone completely.
Yes, and we could perhaps say there's an increasing paranoia over who the customer is.
Yes.
Yeah. Um,
Uh, it, sorry, it lacks complete logic, because the purpose of this, the official purpose, is to avoid money laundering and financing terrorism. Of course, we know everybody who follows the news understands how terrorism is financed and how money laundering is taking place, and it's not via us, for sure.
yes. Just for clarification, because when I think you said here, people might assume that you're actually in Germany. Can you
No,
just clarify where you are?
yes, I'm working from Sweden.
Right. You're working from Sweden, but you have worked extremely hard to delve into the German side of what's happening around Reiner.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Um,
It's a good learning experience, it is.
Indeed, yeah. Uh, the banks, there's another aspect to the banks, and this is one that's come to the fore on certain Substacks, but that is that Reiner earlier in his career challenged some of the major banks in Germany. Deutsche Bank was one of them. And I found it interesting to read so-called academic research into Reiner, which has attempted to say, well, he never got involved in a legal sense in cases against these banks. This is all untrue. But other people who have taken the trouble to do some proper research have easily obtained German reports talking about the cases against the banks, and Reiner was involved in those cases. But for me, it's been very interesting to see how people have jumped into reporting on Reiner. He's in prison. The German state has said he's guilty of embezzlement, and therefore he is a bad man, and nothing that he has done is of value. I think this is a very callous way of investigating the case.
Yes, callous indeed. And I would say anyone who claims to be a journalist saying such things that you're referring to here is not a journalist, because journalism is, well, I shouldn't tell you what it is. You are a journalist and you're doing your work right now. But those critics, they have not done their homework. And in fact, it's homework that I, as a keyboard warrior, can very, very easily do and verify. So no, it doesn't hold up for scrutiny, and it gets to the point when you wonder what's motivating these people to do such things. Are they paid by the opposition, or is it just to make money on coming out with anything, stating anything? Because some of them have their Substacks, and they are indeed making money through subscriptions. So. Most of that is very seriously flawed when you start looking into it.
Yes, that's a very interesting subject on its own. I've mentioned the banks there in relation to how other people have been reporting on Reiner, but Scientology is another one that has
Oh,
now come to the fore, accusations that he
yeah.
was involved with Scientology.
Yes.
When the truth is that he'd already fought in the courts to clear his name from these allegations, with injunctions in place to support Reiner. He'd won his case. And then Scientology is then brought to the surface and gently manipulated as if
Mm.
this was true.
Yeah. It must be intentional, because that matter was into a coffin a long, long time ago, and then there is. I had reason to look into it and found a video statement that Reiner did. We transcribed that into a document that's available. He made it very, very clear. In fact, there was an injunction due to legal process, because at that point in time there was a very elaborate defamation process for Reiner. And this is going 10, 15 years back, something like that. Anyway, a long time back when this happened. So that matter is completely, it has no meaning. Anyone who says anything about Scientology and Reiner, they're completely off it. So yeah, let's not
Well,
waste energy on that one, really.
I introduced these 2 points early because these are some of the hot topics, we'll say, out there now on social media, because some of the reports that have been written on Reiner have definitely caught people's attention. And you know, I'm going to use the word allegedly because we still don't know exactly what's happened, and the court investigation means we don't know exactly what happened in relation to money in some circumstances. But so we have the money, we have We have it's not true that he fought the banks when it is true, and then we have the smear that he was involved in Scientology when he proved that he'd cleared his own name from those earlier allegations. So
Yes.
there's a lot of derogatory comment about Reiner, which makes it difficult to actually get into the details of what did take place and the importance of what his work. You were remote from Reiner initially, and you had enough, it appears to me, you had enough, well, you clearly did, you had enough confidence to say, I want to understand more. You got in touch with him in prison, and then you started to investigate yourself. What would you say is the most important thing that you've discovered around Reiner's case?
It's actually three things. And if you back out of this and don't look too close to the trees when you're in the forest, you look at the forest as a whole. And what you can see are three things. One is the abduction from Mexico. The second is the legal proceedings themselves, which are complex, but not really complex. I'll get back to that later on. The third one is how Marcel Templin and his other two colleagues managed to lay their hands on the proceedings of the house sale, Reiner's final lost property that he managed to sell, and he announced that he was going to sell it. And the technicalities, how that was possible for Marcel Templin to basically lay his hands on all of the proceeds. There was a small sum that actually went to him or his wife, in fact. So those three together paints a very, very clear picture to me. There's no doubt that this was a political takedown. Absolutely no doubt whatsoever.
And that point of view is logical in that the body of evidence that Reiner brought together through the testimony of the expert witnesses for the CIC,
Yes.
that was an incredible amount of information of expert witness professional testimony,
Yeah.
which was showing that what the German government and other governments around the world were doing was itself criminal. I deliberately
Yes.
use that word because
Absolutely.
it brings the whole thing into focus. So
Sorry,
go ahead.
it's more than criminal. It is, and I don't hesitate to use the word I'm using here. It was an intentional genocide.
I would agree with that description. In the period that the CIC was running, one of the things that Mike Robinson, my colleague at UK Column, did was he worked with another man to take the official data of vaccine adverse reactions, which was being released for the public by the MHRA, the Medicines and Health Regulation Authority. Each week they were releasing data about the number of adverse effects and what those adverse effects had been. And the
Yes.
range was, of course, from death, blindness, deafness, all sorts of paralysis and neurological problems
Yes.
and other
Very
problems.
much.
But the British government was being exceptionally devious because when they released this data, it was released in a very haphazard form, which meant that it was very difficult for people to search the information and get an impression of trends. And Mike, with his team, took the government data and brought it into a searchable database, which is still available. And I'll make sure there's a link for this interview.
Yeah.
Put it in a database that people could search. And what quickly became apparent was the volume of damage being done to people, lives absolutely ruined, and
Yes.
in very, very large numbers. What was the British government's reaction to what we were doing? at a particular point when I think it was obvious to them, they knew that people were looking at this searchable database, they simply stopped releasing the vaccine adverse effect data. It was called the
Yes.
yellow card data here in UK.
Okay. Yes.
So Reiner was taking expert witness testimony, saying that there was something very, very serious and dangerous happening. And in UK, in parallel, the UK column was showing via the UK government's own data the damage being inflicted on the population. So this is a criminal act by the governments.
And as such, the power to conceal or remove one of the largest sources of irritation, i.e., Reiner, is completely logical.
Yes, here is this man. He was a nuisance in the beginning. It appeared he was a nuisance, but the scale and quality of the work, the quality of the evidence which he is compiling to show that government policy is either erroneous or criminal, this became dangerous to the German government.
Yes. And I think even on a higher level, even the European level, I would say.
Yes, well, of course, that would make sense. I tend to forget a little bit now that if we're talking Germany, I've got to, of course, think about it as Germany within the European Union political structure.
Yes, yes, it's a very short link to the EU Commission and the level of what was going on in terms of vaccines and so on.
Yeah.
And the mandates and so on. It's all in the same pot.
And the state would have good reason for wanting this man to be silenced. So we could say that if Reiner could be targeted for what he was doing, but the government would be looking for any opportunity to stop him doing what he was doing. So that could be the ability to make an accusation over funding. That could be an accusation over how his formal business structure was set up. Any opportunity would be attractive to the German government.
Yes. And I would also like to say that if this whole story became, I mean, in terms of scandal, let's use that word, in terms of scandal, the scandal that this case is evidence of, under normal functioning governments, it would take down the government. But why hasn't this happened? Why isn't legacy media exposing this? There's so much here that is frightening, really. Frightening because it's evidence of not a democracy, but what's called a democrature, the illusion of democracy.
Yes.
And yeah, so
Well,
we're coming back to the political angle here all the time.
But of course, the whole events were a political angle, and,
Yes.
and Reiner was putting his head above the parapet, and that would have automatically made him a target of the German and the European state. Well, in fact, it was globalist policy that was pushing the Corona-19 narrative and the vaccines.
But you said something that triggered me. Exposing, yes, you could say he was exposing. What was he exposing? He was exposing his sense of justice, his morality. And that's what he was exposing. And you can't have that in a totalitarian system. It doesn't belong there. And this is, I think, the core of the matter, in a sense, if we were going to talk about what we are as humans.
Yes. Well, we won't dwell on it, but I will say that some of the so-called analysis on his case that I've read, I've laughed at the simplicity of the argument that everything that the German state and the courts wrote is true and must be believed, and everything that Reiner has said is a lie and can't be believed. and to see academics following this line
Yeah.
of investigation into a complex case as this is, I found it to be astonishingly naive.
Mm.
You mentioned extradition from Mexico. Tell us why that event was so significant.
Well, because it was neither an extradition nor deportation. To be deported, you'd have to, according to Mexican law, you have to either enter the country illegally or committed a crime. Neither of this happened, so there was no legal ground for issuing a deportation order. Now, something was issued, a paper, which I have a copy of, in Mexican, on Mexican official paper, that was it's a sort of deportation, but it was based on false accusation, and also the procedure for deportation was not the one that actually happened. He was supposed to be deported or delivered to the border crossing in Tijuana, the one you see in all Hollywood films. That's the one he was supposed to be delivered to. And it's all fake because it was also produced on the same date that he was captured, basically. So it's totally fake. And then you have extradition. Well, extradition would be an act happening from Germany asking the Mexican authorities to locate him, arrest him, and be collected by German officials in Mexico and escorted back to Germany. That's physically what happened, but not by German officials, but Mexican officials, which makes it even more suspicious because that was not supposed to happen either. And if that would have been the case formally, there would be a hearing required before that, and it takes time to execute. But instead, we have a plethora of emails going on between the German BKA and LKA and the German embassy in Mexico on how to capture him, to lure him into a situation where he could be taken and physically removed. It's an abduction. It's a state organized abduction.
To qualify this for people, just to put it in some simpler language, this is effectively German secret services working alongside the government in order to, well, they concoct a plan to get Reiner out of Mexico.
Yes, and there's no ambiguity here at all. This is what happened.
Right. I understand that there's some very interesting correspondence which has emerged recently, which shows this collusion between the secret services and the higher state to
Yes.
take Reiner from
Yes.
Mexico. This was suspected for a while, but now the evidence is available on paper. I don't know whether you can be any more specific, because I know this is a very sensitive area in as much as it would form a key component of future challenge by Reiner against his sentence.
Yeah, these documents are used in the civil and criminal complaints that have been filed. I'm saying that vaguely because I'm not sure where the civil complaint is actually filed right now. It's been iterating for months, but it's all in there. And it's clear evidence for anyone to see and understand completely what happened. I've actually made an analysis on that as well. So it's pretty clear what was going on. Is it again? There's no ambiguity that this is what took place.
And we can add to that if Reiner was guilty of embezzling some money and he was overseas, this in itself would be unprecedented action for Germany to recover somebody who most people in his ring of supporters would say this should have been a civil action against him.
Yes.
So to pull him out of for the secret services to conspire with the German state to pull Reiner out of Mexico if he was just guilty of embezzling some money. This is unprecedented in itself.
Yes. Well, maybe for us it is, but maybe this is the action of the German authorities that have been going on for quite some time. One can speculate in that because it seemed like when you look at how this has happened, it seems like they're quite skilled in doing this. And also the implication of this is that this is not a handful of bureaucrats that decided, let's get him home. This must come from somewhere. An order must have been issued. And this brings us to what we call the dossier. And the dossier was a document that was read very early on in the criminal proceeding, in the court proceedings, by one of Reiner's lawyers, lawyer Martin Schwab. Christoph Misery, I'm sorry. He read this dossier, which is a couple of pages of a whistleblower that states basically that this was organized from the beginning in order to they saw Reiner as a threat to democracy, and they were ordered to construct proceedings to take him down. So some people have said that the court said that this document has no meaning because there's no further evidence. So we can judge for ourselves whether we think this is true or not.
Yeah, but the minimum is we now, in our discussion, we're now emphasizing the complications around this around Reiner's case.
Very much so.
And the fact that any individual, it's Reiner Fuellmich at the moment, but any individual who is challenging the state on any topic could face this type of suppression by the state. So there are very, very important facts of law and constitutional issues around what has happened to Reiner.
A plethora. We're not just talking about constitutional violations of German law, but also EU law. So there are so many crimes committed by the state here that it would take us days to go through this.
Yeah,
it would also require intimate knowledge about the legal the law as such. So yes, very complex.
The trial has come under heavy criticism from Reiner's core supporters, and in particular from supporters that were able to be present during the trial, because they say that they were astonished by the whole conduct of the court. Would you like to comment on that at all?
Yeah, and I'm just looking at some notes I have on this particular subject. First of all, most of his calls for evidence were and witnesses were rejected. Most of them. What? How is this possible for anything like this going on? And the fact that the prosecutor, he was finally convicted for something called untreue, which is a breach of trust. And this is a very, I should say, it's called, in German law, this is a very controversial law. It's a law called paragraph 266. And prosecutors call it the Swiss Army knife. If you want to convict someone, this is the way to go, because it is so easy to do with anyone, because it really hinges on the judge's interpretation, not on the jury, not on proof or anything. And this is exactly what happened. Untreue needs 3 conditions to be fulfilled for to be able to convict somebody for it. And I'll read some of the. I'll read it to you. Term number one is you have to have a legal. You have a legal duty to look after someone else's money or assets, as in this case, the foundation. So there's a fiduciary duty in doing that. And the second one is if you breach that duty in a way that is disloyal against the interests of the owner, or in this case, it's the entity, the foundation. And the third one, your breach causes, or at least the risks, financial damage, and you act intentionally, or at least conditionally intentionally. These three conditions must be met. And this brings us to the very simple thing that the fiduciary duty of Vivian Fisher and Reiner was to protect the assets of those funds that we talked about earlier that poured into the foundation. Why did they need to protect them? Well, and this is all very well documented. German authorities were seizing the funds of all these doctors that were protecting their patients from jabbing, and they were seizing their assets. So it was, the trouble was breathing down their necks, basically their backs. So what did they do? Well, they took out loans from this foundation and formalized this with contracts. And Vivian took out a loan, and Reiner took out a loan of about 700,000. What he did was not just simply put it in a different bank account, because that would have been traceable and seizable. So what he did is invested it in his property, and it was used to improve the property for the purpose of selling it later on, which he did. Another part of the funds were converted to gold and held in escrow and still is, in fact, in Berlin. So you could say that they actually performed their fiduciary duty to protect the assets. But the court said, no, this is a sham loan. You used it for personal use and so on. The evidence is that this is embezzlement. The problem is, if they hadn't done this, it would also be not fulfilling their fiduciary duty. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. Damned if you do and damned if you don't. And this is what the entire case really hinged on. All the other stuff is fluby dust. It's just, to me, I would say that this rejection of all the witnesses and documents and so on, this puts us in the category of some sort of inquisition. And it rhymes entirely with the dossier said, construct a case.
Effectively to bring him down, to stop him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is what it is about, really.
Just to add a point in there that when Reiner took the loan against his house, and the contractual arrangement, as I understand it, was that when his house in America was sold, that money would then be returned to the CIC accounts.
Yes.
The house was sold. Reiner was anticipating the money being put back.
Yes.
But it was never put back, and Reiner never had that money.
No. And this is now another thing that convolutes the whole case, because Reiner declared very early on that I'm selling my house, and it was out on the market. He had buyers for it already, actually. And he declared that the proceeds from this house, which sold for 1.3 million euros, something like that, the proceeds would cover easily this loan of 700,000. Now that they felt that threat was over from the state. But he was blocked from doing that, and the court did not admit this fact in the legal proceedings, which is another, can you believe it kind of remark. How is this possible? So I don't know if you want me to go into the details of how Marcel Templin managed to lay his hands on this. And that case in itself is quite complicated, but it involves premeditated arrangement of accounts and so on. So this shows that it was prepared to be done. And in this context, one might say that how could these people, because you have the complaint by Antonia Fisher and Justice Hoffman, alongside with this theft of money. How could this happen without authorities immediately being alerted and stopping this? Well, my impression is that they had the authorities turning a blind eye to this, to what they're doing. So they couldn't have done this in a normal functioning society, this is too crazy, too much money involved in this.
Yes. Looking into the case from the outside, which has been, of course, my starting position until I was actually able to meet Reiner in person, we've got very strange events. And this is coming back to perhaps a little bit of what we talked at the start of our conversation, that strange things were happening that are very difficult to explain. And you've made this core point here that how exactly did these individuals manage to take control of the money? And even when they'd taken control of it, why wasn't the state interested in what they were doing? And alongside that, we have the very strange situation that Vivian Fisher had taken a smaller loan within the same contractual arrangements as Reiner.
Yes.
She had taken a smaller sum, but it was within the same contractual arrangements. And yet she was never brought before the court. In fact, she ultimately was testifying against Reiner.
Yes, she was. And of course, it brings us to the idea that maybe she very promptly paid the money back, actually, when things started heating up. And I think she did that in order to not have the same get into the same trap as Reiner was put in, because it's a trap in exchange for witnessing.
Right, but this was something that occurred to me. Had she agreed, had there been a deal done that she'd agreed to testify against Reiner on the basis that she wouldn't be prosecuted? If that had happened, there presumably should have been an official court record of that fact. But I've never heard anybody talking about an official agreement to testify by Vivian Fisher to testify against Reiner.
Well, I wasn't there, and the judgment papers, of course, only reflect what the court wants to be known. But it's quite possible that this was the case, that she, in exchange for witnessing, she would not be prosecuted. If all things were proper, she has committed the very same crime as Reiner has. If we were talking about breach of trust, the Antroja case, yes. So why didn't the judge prosecute her as well?
Yeah, well, and we don't know we don't know the answer to that. And the other factor which I'd like to mention, you have said quite rightly that when money appears, people can do strange things, but when people get frightened, they can certainly do strange things. And my impression is from what people close to the case have now told me is that there was clearly fear building up around the case. The state had got CIC in its sights. Strange things were happening. People were doing strange things, and I'm pretty sure that fear would have been building inside the CIC team.
Quite plausible, absolutely. particularly if you could feel the scent of higher powers being involved here, which was, I think, quite evident early on due to the anyone who sat in on the court proceedings would have felt that something's wrong here.
Right. Highly significant that a court case takes place in which Reiner is prevented from having the witnesses that he wants to call to defend himself.
Yes.
And then we have the fact that at one particular point, how do we say it? The defense has proven to the court that the prosecution doesn't have a case. And so what then happens is a new charge is created against Reiner. We haven't got
Yes.
in
There was initially a different kind of to begin with. I mean, when this first case, when someone higher up asked the lead prosecutor in Göttingen, where the court proceedings took place and where Reiner formerly was living, asked to take a look at if she could prosecute. She of course said no. There's no legal foundation for any prosecution here, and the case was dismissed. And then that did not suffice for those people up there somewhere. So they got a new prosecutor in from out of town that was young and more malleable, I would say, that took up the very same facts of a case and indeed could find reasons to go forward. Initially it was embezzlement, but untreue is also a sort of embezzlement. But as you point out, yes, the defense managed to prove that the first case did not stick. Whereas not the prosecutor, but the judge changed the terms, which okay, maybe this is common in German law, but I would say that would be a scandal in Swedish law at least. That why would the judge do that? I mean, it would be the job of the prosecutor in that case, but it would.
Michael, just come in here because to me this is such an important issue. First of all, can you help set the scene a bit? Because court cases that take place in Europe are usually in front of a judge or a panel of judges. But I believe in some cases there can be a jury present, but not always. Now, I'm not fully familiar with that aspect of the law for Germany. Are you able to say with accuracy what he was facing in court? It was a panel of judges, but
Yes.
there was no jury, I don't think.
No jury, no, to my knowledge.
Yes.
I'll have to come back to you and I'll check it and I'll get back to you if it turns out it was different. But no, yes, this is a panel of judges.
Right. And then I'm going to say, and of course, the judges ultimately are appointed via if not a political system, through a politically approved system of the appointment of judges. And I'm very interested in this subject because I've been following the attacks on our system of law in the United Kingdom. A retired judge, Lord Leveson, has now been openly working on a report to remove juries from more trials and to leave the judgment with the judge themselves.
Professional.
And the professional. And we are reassured in a very condescending way that we should trust the judge. But when you ask a simple question and say, well, who appoints the judges? It's the Judicial Appointments Commission. And then when you say, well, who appoints the Judicial Appointments Commission? You find that very quickly the web comes back into the political arena. So the moment you do not have a jury of somebody's peers, ordinary men and women from the public, anything is possible within the court.
Yeah. So what you're pointing out is that intentional or not, we have a system problem here. There's something not working in the system properly, and I think it becomes even more piquant if you consider that the very government that was seizing the funds from these alternate doctors and that Vivian and Reiner acted upon is the very system that is convicting him.
Yes.
So
Yes.
impartiality, I don't think so.
Yeah. And so the procedure is very strange. We have a change in the panel of judges in order, it would appear, to force through the prosecution under the new charge. And we have the fact that at a particular point the judge stopped all oral evidence given in person by witnesses. That was stopped in the court, and everything had to be submitted on paper.
Oh, yes. That was another another trick in order for the public, because there was a lot of considerable public attention from during the proceedings, and one way to make it harder would be to only allow written to go away from oral statements to written ones, and yeah, everyone can imagine how that would help.
Yes. And ultimately, the trial progresses, and Reiner is sentenced. And many people have said to me, he's he's convicted of a financial offence. The prison sentence was excessive.
Hmm. Yes. Okay, again, I'm a layman at this. Not only was the prison sentence excessive, why was he in prison before the trial? And why is he in prison after the trial? He's not a murderer. He's not an ex-murderer. He's not a terrorist. It's under appeal. All of these things, when you put it in one of the bowls of justicia, it weighs very, very uneven to the state here. It simply doesn't make any sense. The only logic here is that, yes, they need to silence him. And of course, he was also silenced during the fall and winter here. His ability to make statements that he did before were thwarted. So now he writes them instead, and we convert them to an AI voice just to beat the system.
Yes,
But the actions are the same, and the actions speak for themselves, I think.
yes. And of course, he was further penalised inside prison by spending 6 months in solitary confinement,
Mm,
which is,
yeah.
I know of one lady in UK who was the victim of child abuse who was, I think, well, I'm very sure, has a lot of information in her head which the British state would not want revealed. And she spent 19 months in solitary confinement. But
Yes.
Reiner, so we know that the Western state uses solitary confinement to try and destroy or certainly silence people
Yes.
who've already been convicted. Reiner was able to say to me in prison that it ended up where he actually had prison warders, so the staff of the prison, saying to him, "We do not know why you are in solitary confinement. You need to start a challenge against it." And
Mm,
I found that a very significant comment because he was showing that even the staff in the prison didn't know why they were doing certain things to him. The implication, of course, is that a higher power was telling the prison governor, that
yes.
the chief executive of the prison, I'm not sure what the term is in Germany, would be telling him how Reiner was to be treated in prison.
Yes. And the fact that a person can do such things is scandalous in itself. That's not supposed to happen in a modern society. So yes, that's also significant. Luckily, and of course, this prison down in Göttingen appears to be a very terrible place to be in. This said, where he is right now is quite decent, and your own experience, I think, would show that he is treated very well, as you should in a modern society prison in the Western world.
Yes, and
Not a dungeon.
I'll add to that point because many people who've never been inside a prison. I've been inside prisons. I've been up to the highest security prisons in UK in order to visit people, and I will say to the audience that if you've never been inside a prison, you should go. You should go and meet and sit with a prisoner. There are many of them who are in prison who have nobody to receive. They have no letters or telephone calls. They don't have any family. So there are plenty of good, compassionate roles that people can do. But if you've never been inside a prison, when you go, you realize what the deprivation of liberty actually means, what it and
Yeah.
the terribly depressing, austere atmosphere. For anybody to say that being in prison is soft, this is ridiculous. And then, of course, you're inside a prison where your whole life, your whole physical and mental safety are in the hands of a state which is increasingly revealing itself to be
Yeah.
callous, cruel, and malicious.
Yes.
So prison is a very, very tough environment. And if I've seen some comments from people on social media saying, oh, well, he should rot in jail. And I'm thinking you really don't understand what you're
No.
talking about in respect of what prison actually means.
Yes. Yeah.
When I started to get involved in Reiner's case, and that was due to the enthusiasm and the contact from supporters of Reiner saying to me, Brian, you participated in the CIC committee. You gave witness to Reiner. What's happened to him is wrong, and you need to pay attention. I started down that journey because I would say for a while I had misgivings about what I was hearing, but we also had enough other cases and things going on. You cannot cover anything, but I was encouraged to dip my toe into the Reiner case. And when I did that, I had no idea what had happened, what had really happened. I'd heard all the rumors he was guilty and he was in prison. That was fact. But I didn't really know what was happening. So was I dealing with a criminal, or was I dealing with a more complicated case where possibly Reiner had made some decisions that weren't very wise and subsequently had paid a price for that? Before I say where my mind is at the moment, you came on board to support him. You saw all the things that have been written about him. He had been convicted, albeit with an appeal happening. What is your feeling now after all the research that you've done and all the communication you've had with Reiner? Is this man a criminal? Is he somebody who was working in a very tough environment who made a mistake? Or is he a man who has absolutely been framed and taken down by the German state?
Well, to answer a question like that, I think we have to look inside ourselves, which I have done, because there is an abstract and a rational part of us that is acting on our minds all the time. And if you're not friends with your own parts of how you react to things, you might come to the wrong conclusion. And the wrong conclusion would be to think that Reiner has done something illegal. And even if he is subject, you could say that, well, he was a sloppy business management. Even that I would forgive him for. I'm not the one to judge anyone here. because when you start a new business, things are going to be ad hoc. And that's the only thing I think you could claim him to have done. But he had also had colleagues that should have done their duty. Colleagues should have done their duties as well to make sure that the books were in order. I'm not saying the books weren't in order, but I'm saying that everything would be in order. In fact, they should have been part of this fiduciary duty to protect the assets. Did they? No, they didn't. So in fact, they are the criminals here. So no, by no. And then of course, you have this, what you just mentioned yourself. There is this emotional part of one that there's also a little fragment of doubt. Could it be that he is the con man that some people say he is? And well, you have to do your own homework. You have to satisfy your curiosity for truth. And I think I've done that. And I'm completely 100% convinced that this man is subject to political takedown. He is completely, entirely innocent. In fact, we need him out to continue the work he started. And this is one of the driving forces here. So that's my reply.
Thank you very much for that. And my response then is to say that, yes, I read what had been written. I found some of the so-called academic analysis simply so naive in its structure to be unbelievable. And subsequently, when I've been able to talk to an increasing number of people around the case, some of whom were present during the court, I've come to the position where I understand this is not a simple case by any means. And not only do we not know all of the truth, it's impossible for Reiner to get out facts and truth from his point of view because he was denied in the court and he was also suppressed from speaking out in prison. And it's also been very difficult for him to get appropriate legal support because many people have said that the legal team themselves who was trying to defend him were threatened at various stages through the court case. So I found myself before the visit with Reiner thinking, well, okay, am I dealing with a criminal con man here? But he, to my point of view, did some really excellent work in challenging the state against some really state-inspired crimes. But was he a criminal or was he a man who came under pressure in doing what he was doing, where he made some decisions that with hindsight were not good decisions? And he's paid for that. And I have witnessed in the UK over 20 years, the UK government committing heinous crimes, including being involved in the torture of people. So the state is capable of all sorts of things, particularly if it's worried that the state is going to be exposed. So I certainly came in with a sympathetic viewpoint that I could believe that Reiner had been targeted by the German state. When I was able to meet him in person, that starts to change things because you can get a feel for the person and how they reacted. And very quickly, Reiner demonstrated his passion for the work that he'd been doing in the first place, which was to get the truth out about what was happening. And he also started to talk to me, and I mentioned this at the start of our conversation again, when he was almost struggling to explain how strange things became, how people changed, how things happened. And maybe people in the audience wouldn't pay much attention to that, but I did because I've also lived that life over 20 years. And the other thing which Reiner told me in person, which I was very interested in, is that in his early days, he'd been involved in two child abuse cases, which involved ritualistic abuse. And when I mentioned them to him, he said to me very quickly, and in one of them I was threatened, and then he told me how he was threatened. And as he said it to me, I found myself thinking, yes, this is an important case, and that would be exactly how you were threatened. How can I
Mhm.
say this to you today, Michael? Because over 20 years I've tried to help, and I've been alongside some of these very unpleasant cases of child abuse. And the reason I focus in on this is that I could believe that his work as a prosecutor in those ritualistic abuse cases would have placed him under scrutiny from some very unhappy and powerful people.
Yes.
Never mind that he then went on uh, to challenge very large banks in Germany.
Yes.
So my visit started to bring this picture together. The other thing that came across is that he's very trusting. He's very personable and trusting, and I can easily believe that that trust in other people, such an easy trust, a readily given trust, could have meant that he was vulnerable to the actions of other people around him.
Absolutely. And that subject on trust is very interesting to dig into. But what I can say, it's pretty obvious to me, having done such mistakes myself, is that when you build an organization, you only have an option to trust other people, because you cannot build the organization and group unless you do. You have to give trust to get it back. However, when you have the sums of money involved here, it attracts people that will abuse it. That's a fact.
Yeah.
And this is simplified put. I think this is what happened here.
Yes. Uh, that is a really excellent point, and I think is a very good point to end on. I'd like, just as a last comment, to say I come back to being astonished at the simplistic and I actually think the word is abusive articles that
Mm,
have been written on this man. And of
yes.
course, he can't defend himself properly. But if we say, what did he do in the beginning? Did he show to the world a vast body of evidence showing the real dangers of what was going on with COVID-19 policy, the vaccination policy, and lockdown? Absolutely, he did.
Mm,
If he did something wrong, he's then paid a terrible price for it. But I think to see people who call themselves academics just writing hit pieces, presumably to gain status with their particular website or whatever it is, I find this intolerable. I find it very sad. And if we don't investigate the Reiner Fuellmich case properly, in depth, taking everything into account, what is factual evidence, what is true, what's accurate, what Reiner says and does not say, we're not doing our job as either as journalists or investigators, or as you say, human beings. There's something more to this case than just this nasty man ended up in prison.
yes. Yeah. Again, I will endorse critical thinking any time of day. What we have seen from these defamation sources is not critical thinking. It is some other intent, but it is actually counterproductive to trying to improve the society that we are seeing now being deconstructed. So it is it becomes worse than just defamation, because it bears down on what Reiner represents. I mean, the word hero is used in his name very often. But this guy has stood up and he's taken a bullet for us. We have to act on that.
Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you,
It's been
Brian.
an extended time, but it's been really interesting. And I know you're still working. I am still working on this case. There's a lot more to talk about, but I think that was a really fascinating discussion, and I hope it's got a lot more people thinking, well, maybe we need to think more about what this case is about.
Yeah, critical thinking with a big heart.
With a big
I mean,
heart.
everything comes down to what we are as humans.
Yeah. Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you, the same, Brian. It's been a pleasure. Very enjoyable. Thank you.